Hey guys, welcome back for more tutorials. My name is Magnet, and today we're going to be talking about playing against Mech and ZvT, and more specifically, beating Mech and ZvT. We're going to be talking a lot about unit compositions, the available timings that there are against Mech, and mostly you just want to kind of keep the Terran off balance, keep them having to constantly shift their unit composition, or you can just run a more of a contained type of strategy and just take the whole map and wait until their death push comes across and try to just pick it apart. So we'll talk all about that in these couple of replays that I have. So let's go ahead and jump into the game. The first game we're going to watch here is between Life and Maru. Go ahead and get that started. Again, I apologize if you can hear me fiddling with my volume because it's way too loud and I have to turn it down so I don't blow my eardrums out. But we have Life over here. He's the one we're going to be watching today, and Mech specifically can kind of springboard off of any kind of Terran opener. So you need to know about Mech sooner rather than later. And usually you'll do so with these Overlord Scouts by floating them in there. There's a timing at about maybe 8 or 9 minutes. You'll have to float your Overlord in there to kind of figure out what's going on, to see if they're researching stim or if they're dropping factories. More specifically, whether they're researching stim or not is kind of a very linear decision that you can make and make that determination as far as Mech or not. By the way, this game's opening up with a little bit of a bunker rush. We're not going to pay too much attention to that. We'll talk about bunker rushes in a later video, so don't worry, too much about that. And again, I made the very unwise decision of eating right before I decided to start doing more videos, so I'm not a smart person. So, Life right now is just basically trying to push this away. No indication of Mech is going on so far yet, just Maru adding more command centers, taking extra gases, landing his barracks back in his base. He's going to be able to repair through this. This will just basically normalize him to a normal game as Life is able to take his natural expand. Now, seeing the factory here, this doesn't really mean a whole lot because Terrans can go off of factories any single game they want, no matter what type of strategy they're going to follow it up with. This could be anything. This could be Stim, this could be Banshees, this could be multiple factories with Blue Flame, and then back into Bio. I mean, there's a lot of different options here, so really Overlords floating back in here are going to be what's going to tell you what's going on. Right now, Life's doing a pretty good job as far as slowing Maru down here, but this doesn't really have anything to do with Mech. It's more so to do with pushing off the bunker rush. One interesting thing you can do is running 2-base lair builds are really strong against Mech most of the time because they will usually be forced to open up with Hellions, and then they'll usually go with a safety tank or two just to hold off most roach plays. So 2-base lair into something like Spire for Mutalisk is actually pretty strong, and that's what we're going to see here from Life. So he's getting his lair up right now, and it's going to be strong because a lot of times these will open with things like Banshees and Hellions to try and harass, and if you have Mutalisks out to push that away, and then you can take that momentum all the way back to their base, maybe kill some SCVs, even forcing them to build missile turrets when they don't want to is good enough. So right now Maru getting Blue Flame here, so this is kind of a 2-factory Blue Flame Hellion as well as the Banshee coming out as well. But once you see multiple factories like this, it's a pretty good bet, at least if you don't see Stim especially being researched, that it's going to be Mech. Life right now just trying to wall off and not take any damage from these Hellions and Banshees and whatnot. Spire's almost finished, and he is saving up some money so he can produce a good amount of Mutalisks to start getting them out on the map and start to push this harassment away. More importantly, to take a 3rd base. One other thing with Mech is that they really need a 3rd base to start getting their Mech army to be substantial. And I think even Maru understands what's going on here. So he's starting 2 Thors and he has 2 mines out. So it's not like your first Mutalisk in this type of build are just going to walk in there and kill everything. I mean, they might, especially in lower leagues, you might get fortunate with stuff like that, but mostly it's to clear out stuff on the map and to take a 3rd base. If they decide to go Thor, they have really long travel times. It'll take them forever to get there. And there's a lot of time for you to prepare for that. But 2-base Muta especially is a strategy that you might be able to just ride these units all the way back home and start killing stuff in his base if he's not totally prepared particularly well. So right now, Banshee's just kind of floating out in the middle of nowhere. Mutalisks have followed these units all the way home. You need to be careful as far as what you engage. You can't just throw these Mutalisks away. And more importantly, this isn't really about the Mutas themselves. Yeah, you might be able to do stuff with them, but more importantly, it's to get them to make Thors. And once the Thors come out, you can start switching into things like Roaches, and if you have Roach speed and maybe +1 like we see from Life, then the follow-up is brutal because they really need Thors, or excuse me, they really need tanks in order to deal well with these Roaches. So in the early stages of this game, if you're facing Mech, switching back and forth between Mutalisk and Roach can be really hard for the Mech player to deal with. So maybe if you produce a nice clutch of mutas, you might bait out some Thors, or at minimum a ton of missile turrets, and in which case if they're just turtling up with a ton of turrets, you can just take the whole map and there's not a whole lot the Mech can really do about it. But if you can force out Thors and you can halter, that doesn't really make sense. If you can stop any sort of tank production on these factories for any amount of time, then switching back into Roaches is going to be really strong, because Roaches are really good against Thors, and Thors aren't very good against Roaches and Zerglings and just lots of units that aren't Mutalisks. So that's kind of the idea behind this from Life, is to show these mutas, make him overreact with the Thors, and then just bludgeon him with these Roaches. Another key fact to realize here against Mech is that their units take forever to build, and they really only gain that much strength if they have a lot of time to get a big force assembled. If it's just small forces and they're not that much stuff, they're not that strong. So being super aggressive against a Mech player is one really good way to get them thrown off and kind of put the game into your favor with repeated attacks over and over to get your cheap units to trade against their expensive units. So that's going to be the philosophy that Life takes throughout the rest of this game, is now he's got him in a bad situation. Maro's just desperately trying to switch into tanks, but as these Roaches come up here, I mean, if you can even get the Roaches on top of the tanks, then that'll be a big win for you as well. So Roaches coming in here, there will be often SCDs to repair, but usually you just have to target fire with your Roaches on the most important targets. Right here you probably just target down Thors. More Roaches reinforcing. Also notice that the Lings are reinforcing now that the Hellions are dead. So just getting all over him and not giving him a chance to breathe is a really good way to counter these Mech styles in the early game. So we're going to see repeated aggression here from Life. And note that he doesn't have a ton of drones right now. And this is a calculated risk. I mean, if it pays off, then it's going to work really well. If it doesn't, then you might be in a little bit of trouble being behind in workers, but of course you can refill them a lot faster than a Terran can, especially if you start dealing damage against him. So Life is going for the route of just trying to bludgeon him to death with varying unit compositions. And if the Terran ever gets enough tanks to beat out the Roaches, you just switch back into mutas and you abuse the fact that they don't have the right units to deal with either Roach or muta this early. This won't happen every game. This is one of those types of things where you have to judge based upon the way you want to play it. A lot of times the Terrans can play safe enough to the point where they can get Thors and tanks out enough to deal with both, to which you'll have to start switching into some higher level of tech. We can see this game is going to end very soon because Life is just ripping Maro apart right now with constant reinforcements streaming across the map. So it won't always end like this, but this is definitely a possibility. So Life just kind of beats down Maro there. Let's take a look at a much longer game though against Mech and explain how, if they're able to stabilize, what you're going to have to start doing to get an advantage later and later in the game. So this game is going to feature a Zerg that is very infamous for running a lot of strategies that may be really annoying for other races, and they center a lot around swarm hosts. Assuming this is the game that I think it is, I think this is Firecake versus some Terran, I can't remember. And this is an older replay, but these replays still look the same nowadays, so that's why you get this weird loading screen right now, and it takes a lot longer to load into the game, but we'll get there and we'll get going as soon as we can get a chance to. So here we go, and it is Firecake. Oh, it's versus Straylock. Okay, that makes sense, because Straylock is known to be almost Mech exclusive Terran. So we're going to fast forward a lot. We're going to fast forward up until the point where the Terran has the third base, because Straylock's going to stabilize in this game, and Firecake isn't just going to be able to bludgeon him with a lot of units like Life did. You can also choose to play this route if you want to go for a more economic plays. We'll note the last game that Life was low on bases and low on drones early on in the game, and that's more of an advanced tactic, but some people can make it work, some people like that style, and some don't. This overall is the safer style. It's better to get you prepared against all the things that Mech can do. And we'll note a few things on the build here. Again, this is going to be Reactor Hellion into Cloak Banshee. Note that this does not mean Mech. This can still be Bio, so you still need to get an Overlord in there and figure out if he's researching Stim. If he is researching Stim, then it's obviously going to be some kind of Marine play. You can also see his units if he's making Marines, and that'll obviously indicate that he wants to go into a Bio play. But if he's not researching Stim and you can't find that anywhere in his base, then you can just assume Mech and kind of play with the Muta Roach switching. And even if he does some sort of bad Bio play where he gets a super late Stim, then, I mean, you'll still be in great shape with that opener anyway. So So it looks like what we're seeing so far from Firecake is he's opening up with roaches, and that's mostly to respond to the Hellions. It's a decent response to the Hellions, and it'll zone them out pretty well, and then you can use Queens and whatnot to push off the Banshee. Once again, this doesn't necessarily mean Mech, but of course, if you can ever see extra factories coming down like this, then you're going to know for sure that it is Mech. And you really need to get an Overlord in there and figure out what's going on. You can transform Overseers since they fly faster. It's a good idea to do that and kind of just run them in there really fast to see what's happening. So right now, if we look at Firecake's vision, he doesn't really know what's going on, and that's why he's making this Overlord. He sees the 3rd command center, he sees the starport not really doing much. More importantly, he sees all these extra factories, so he has to know for sure, this is Mech, and I have to take this very seriously. And he's doing the same thing we did last time. He just opened up with roaches, coincidentally, to stop the Hellions, and right afterward he's switching into these mutalisk, and he's going to go for that early game. But like I said, Straylock stabilizes on this. He doesn't get killed by the roach muta switches that Firecake tries, and then once Firecake realizes he can't keep doing that, he switches into Swarm Hosts, which will kind of corner the Terran in their base for a really long time, and make them have to choose a moment to move out, to which you can reposition your Swarm Hosts. And it looks like he starts to fly in here with his mutalisks. He's not really doing much, he only has 3 mutalisks. And he also realizes that if this is Mech and I'm attacking this late, it's only 12:30 and I don't really have any good form of pressure going on, if I don't really know that I can break him right away with this muta and roach switches, then I should probably just give it up and go straight for the infestation pit and start getting into my later stages of tech. I should also mention that there's various other means of dealing with this. If you want to stay on roaches, then you probably want to support that with some Hydralisks, and maybe use some drops with your Overlords. You can drop on top of the tanks and make them shoot each other. And you can also get Vipers to blind the tanks and approach that way. So there's a lot of other options, but for the most part, the Swarm Hosts are really the best way to put the Terran in the corner and make them have to sit there for the whole game while you just take the whole map. So note that his creep spread is right up in Straylock's face. It's just barely outside of range. You can burrow your Swarm Hosts here and start sending Locusts forward and maybe kill some units. At least force him to stay there, and then maybe you can do a little bit of multi-pronging or something with your Mutalisk if there aren't a lot of turrets. But this game is ridiculously long, so it's going to be a long time of Swarm Host sieges just sending Locusts forward. But the most important thing is that in the meantime, he has extra bases and he's putting down defensive units, or more specifically static defenses at his extra bases. So he has this base over here, he has this base over here, and literally you'll want to get to a point where you're mining on like 5 bases worth of gas at all times. And he also has an Overlord at every single base. You can even drop creep at every single base if you want to, just to prevent the Terran from ever getting another base throughout the rest of the game. And that's the whole goal here. By the way, we do see the Vipers coming in, we do see the Hydralisk Den coming in like we were talking about. There's an Ultralisk Cavern. Really, almost every tech is going to be good against Mech in a good enough and well-supported fashion. There are Swarm Hosts already starting to siege that base right now, but you can pretty much choose either Ultras, Roach Hydra, a lot of Mutas. There's a lot of different things you can choose. You can even go into Broodlords if they don't ever get up into a lot of Vikings or something. A lot of the Mech will be supporting with a lot of Vikings, so it's a little more risky. But the idea here is that you have so much tech flexibility that if they ever are to break the position with your Swarm Hosts, you should have infinity money from mining all over the map, considering it's going to take them forever to break the Swarm Host siege and ever get out on top of you. And if you have infinity money, then you can examine their unit composition and be like, okay, since I can produce whatever I want, what's specifically going to do well against the units that he has? So if he has like 50 tanks, and you have infinity money and the tanks break the Swarm Hosts, you can just make a ton of Mutalisks and go kill all the tanks and win. So you have to think of examples like that. Either way, Roach Hydra and especially Viper being mixed into any sort of composition, and as well as Ultralisk, will trade pretty well if you're at maxed out against his Mech army. And by pretty well, I mean it probably won't kill the Mech army in one fell swoop because Mech is super strong if it's entrenched, but it will at least weaken it, and you're going to at least take multiple fights to eventually wear the Mech down. You're usually not just going to get one big fight that ends the game. So don't think of it as, I need to win this one big battle against Mech. You actually need to win several, and you need to win the battle of just being everywhere on the map and having infinity money all the time. See, the Terran is starting a little bit to try and clean up some of these bases, but that's why you want to have Overlords at every base. You want to have these static defenses at every base. You can even poop creep, so if they want to land something, you can block it off for a long enough time. Look at this, Strelok actually wants to get his 4th base established out here, but the creep is so far forward that it's going to be really hard for him to. And he does have enough swarm hosts here to continue sending locusts forward that if he tries to gain position, he's going to have to do it at the cost of some units. So this is all really good play here from Firecake, and this is all stuff you should really be paying attention to. Another good thing to note is that he is supporting these with queens because there can be some instances where Terran just doesn't make ground units for quite a while and they just make a lot of banshees and they try to just fly over your swarm host and kill them. So supporting with things like hydras, queens, those are all good ideas to at least balance your unit composition. This is going to be a long time, and you're just going to see this for a long time, and you have to stay patient with Mech. You're going to continue sending this forward. You will want to keep an eye on this so they don't just unsiege and walk all over you. But you do want to focus a lot on having bases around the map. You can even put hatcheries down in the middle of the map like he's doing here just for Viper energy. And as your Vipers, they're going to be kind of the things that will really hurt the Terran if you can land the right blinding clouds. So if you see a big clump of tanks like this, you can blinding cloud it, and then the locusts will deal more damage because there won't be as much tank fire on top of them. But most importantly, I just want to stress that this is all about just keeping the Terran pinned back in their base for as long as possible, and then doing your best to deal with the army as it moves out on the map. So Strelok's starting to approach max, and that's when the Terran's going to start to get really scary, especially with Mech. Around 17 to 19 minutes is when they're going to start to max out with a huge Mech army, and they usually won't have a lot of SCVs, so it will be more supplied than what you usually have. But if you have the bank behind it and you can refill with enough larvae and whatnot, then all of a sudden decomposing this and kind of taking it apart isn't going to be as hard as it seems. So Strelok's starting to push out just a little bit. You'll note that you do want to keep units alive. You still need to get some mileage out of these things. So he does retreat with his swarm host there. And if you can ever get good Vipers hits on a big clump of tanks or something, that'll be really strong. He's also starting to pepper in different units like Ultralisks. It's a smorgasbord of different units you can actually just throw in there. Here's the blinding clouds. The Ultralisks can walk right up here. I don't know what they're doing. They're not attacking right now, but this is a little weird. But yeah, just picking apart little pieces of this army, this is an okay trade, even just to make him move back to lose that amount of units. If you're not cutting into your bank too deep by doing stuff like that, then that's okay. He's really just trying to keep the Terran cornered for the entire game as long as he can help it. And again, still taking bases around the map so he has that bank continuing to build. It's exactly what you want to do. So again, we're going to see quite the long swarm host siege. They might drop down point defense drones just to protect against your locust shots. This is all very normal stuff, and it's not like you're losing anything by sending these locusts forward, so it's really on you just to keep up on doing that and keep shifting your unit composition based upon what you see. Strelok's starting to get a little more aggressive here, and this is where you want to be a little bit careful. You will notice that the queens are doing some work against these banshees, but the Vipers are going to be very important, and eventually these swarm hosts will die and it'll have to refill on something else. But as long as you can keep them alive and sending locusts forward and trading out locusts for units, that's going to be good for you. So Strelok's starting to get a little further out here, but it's taken him like 6 or 7 minutes with the max army just to push out like another screen onto the creep. So keeping them cornered is very much a big deal here. So you see Strelok kind of moving forward just a little bit. See him taking out these hatcheries in the middle. They don't matter too much because they were just for Viper energy anyway. The pulls on the Thor is pretty good. Blinding clouds all over the army. And again, this is all about not winning the fight with these types of attacks. It's really just about killing off maybe 4 or 5 units and then replacing that supply as soon as possible. Also note that one really good thing that he's doing is these stack defenses are so much. They're so important because if you're to lose fringe bases to things like Hellion run-bys, that's just silly and that's nullifying any advantage that you had. Note that he's constantly refilling on various units. You saw some Hydralisks in there a little bit ago. There's some Ultralisks on the way right now, 5 of them. And he just needs to fight this army and at least kill most of it, or at least some of it. And a lot of times this will be on the move. That's when your locusts can get good shots. It's just about being relentless and keeping that bank up and spending your money. So you can see the tanks are starting to lose a lot to these swarm hosts because they have to move eventually, and that's when you can usually get some damage done on them. He will lose a base here, but losing a base isn't that bad if you have 4 or 5 others around the map. So not a big deal right now. And when you feel confident enough and when you have enough stuff, or at least when they get to your doorstep and when you have to attack, that's when you can go and that's when you can do your best to try and knock this down. But if you've been diligent as far as keeping them in their base for long enough and picking units off as they've crossed the map, then you should be able to clean these pushes up pretty well. He's not going to win the game with this right now, of course, because we know that it goes on for about another 15 minutes. But again, he just dealt enough damage to this. This is a much more manageable sized army to refill on units and just run it over with the next wave. So it's not about winning one big battle, it's about winning 3 or 4 smaller battles, to which you just have to reduce their unit count. So yeah, losing bases here, again, that's to be expected a lot of times against these huge mech pushes. You just need to be able to eventually be able to pick it apart. So you can see every little lost unit for mech is a huge loss, and now this army is down to 2 units. He lost 2 bases for it, but he had a million other bases around the map. It's no big deal. So continuing denying bases around the map is usually how you're going to win against mech. So looking in the Terran base here, this is basically mined out. This is also getting very close to being mined out. This is going to be mined out pretty soon. You can click on the patches and see how much is left. That'll leave him on pretty much one base that hasn't been mined from very much. As long as you can deny these fringe bases, then all of a sudden it's like you have units everywhere, you have creep everywhere, you have bases everywhere. If they can't take another base, then they just simply can't win. And that's usually what you're going to have to do against mech. You usually won't be able to just crash in there and kill their army when they're this big. You usually just have to wait for them to run out of money and lose enough armies to yours while being on your side of the map. So that's pretty much all we're going to see for the rest of this game. Is we're going to see Strelok start to slowly starve. You'd like to see Firecake peel off about 6 or 7 Hydras and come kill this base. Strelok is getting a bit of money from here, but he's having to mine from across the map, so it's not really doing that much. Also, one thing I need to mention is you do want to keep an eye on their unit composition, of course. We mentioned that just a little bit, but if they start making a lot of like battle cruisers or something, then you need to switch into something really heavy like Corruptor, Vipers to pull the battle cruisers in. If there's a lot of Ravens, you might want to consider switching into Infestors so you can fungal big clumps of them. You need to consider all those different things. We'll note that the bank here is still pretty big for Firecake. We'll also note that the units lost is still in Firecake's favor, so it seems like he lost a lot to those bases dying, but he's still doing just fine, only because he has the money to lean back on. You might experience some of these Hellion run-bys, and that's why these static defenses are so important around the map. I think Strelok is more importantly just trying to find somewhere he can actually take a base, and he's just realizing that there's something at every single base here. There's no way I'm ever going to get something else out on the map. Continuing upgrades here, of course, is very important, so keep up on your upgrades with whatever units you're using, but most of the time you're going to be using kind of like all units, so just keeping all of your upgrade buildings spinning throughout most of this is going to be really a good thing for you to do. Sending little pieces back to deal with this harassment. Again, he lost a base, but what's the big deal? He has bases all over the map that he can still mine from, so his mining isn't that great right now. You will want to make sure you don't go too low in drones, and you are managing where your drones are mining from pretty effectively, which it seems like Firecake is kind of getting away from a little bit. This is one other thing you should note, is that static defenses are a really good way to buy time, and especially if they're going for like a big battlecruiser army or something, a lot of spores can be really handy as far as taking those out, because if they're losing, and you can use your Vipers to pull units into these spores, and losing battlecruisers and stuff to spores, Ravens to spores, there couldn't be any more of a hilariously bad trade for Terran in that circumstance. So there are other different ways you can kind of peel apart the units a little bit and deal with them in little chunks at a time. He's starting to realize that this may be an issue, though, because look how many Vikings there are. There's a Raven out, there's 2 Banshees. He's starting to realize that a battlecruiser transition could be in the works, but most importantly, he won't have anything in the works if he just can't mine. So Strelok's pretty much got one last push in him, and we're going to have to watch Firecake resist that push as he comes across the map. And if he can resist the push, then there's not much for Strelok to rely on. Good Viper pulls to pull the tanks in there. You can see blinding clouds on top of where the army was right there. I think there was a few Thors. Everything just crashing in right now, and he's just trying to trade the best he can. Note that he's really low on bank right now, so you can't be too sloppy with these engagements. And most of the time you want to engage them when they're on your side of the map, when they're on creep, so you can get up in their face faster and deal better damage. So this was a little bit of an overextension here from Firecake, and he starts to get into a little bit of trouble from doing that. This is also one other important and really cool thing you can do against Mech, is researching Neural Parasite. Because if you can Neural Parasite 4 or 5 units, that's like, 20% of their army. That can be a big deal if you Neural Parasite all their Thors, for example. So that's a good way to help kind of break these down, and especially when they're only down to a handful of units. If you just Neural Parasite all their units, then you can kill them off easily. So Neural Parasite's a really cool tool, especially to use in the late game. So be mindful about stuff like that. So, gonna still see him pushing in here. Firecake again just needs to buy time, needs to get his bank put together, needs to refill his supply, using his Viper energy just to pull in 1 or 2 units at a time. Good fungal growth on the Vikings, again just picking off a few units. Can't expect to kill everything at once. And eventually, if he's able to do this enough, he'll be able to stop this attack and break it down. So, now the tanks have to move forward. He's on creep right now. Everything's going to do better on creep for you. And he's still just trying to refill here. And once he's refilled, or once he runs out of room, is where he really wants to attack. So, notice how he's just moving back, letting the mech gain position until he's totally maxed out and he's totally up on energy and totally ready to go. So, it's really just all about being patient. And like we can see, Strelok dies here very soon. And it's really just because Firecake just eventually runs him over and eventually is able to peel this apart. So, it's just more of the same stuff. I just want to play through the rest of this game so we can see this end. Note that Strelok is hurting for money bad, and he still does not have another base. He finally just landed it, but if he loses this army, he's just so bad on income. There's barely any SCVs. Firecake could kill this easily with Swarm Host or something. There's not a whole lot more that Strelok can do if he's totally mined out at all of his other bases. So, Firecake's in a really good place here. Again, still just waiting, using Vipers, using little random tools like that to try and pull in a couple of units is Firecake. If you can ever catch them on siege like this, that's also a good time to crash in, but Strelok's starting to realize that this is all he's got, and Firecake even canceling out the mining here once again. So Strelok's army, notice that it's at about 150 supply because he's lost about 5 or 6 units during this attack, and eventually there's going to come a point where Firecake can just crush him. Notice pulling in a few more units just to pick those off. Now he's starting to base trade just a little bit by saying, alright, well if you really want to try and protect your stuff over here, then you're not going to have much back at home, and I can start to base trade and kind of force you into a bad spot here. But there's not much more that Strelok can do here. Let's just fast forward until he finally loses. I don't even know if he actually loses this army. He might just realize that he has no chance and just leave, which is common, and it's really the right choice because he has no options here. Fungal growth all over everything. Locust still being really irritating. And since Strelok can't replenish anything, and because he has basically no mining right now, he's very, very dead. Oh man, these games are extremely long and extremely taxing if you're both playing in them and just commentating or talking about them. So finally we're getting the fight we want. Blinding Cloud on everything, Neuroparasite on a bunch of the Thors so that they can help out in the fight. And if nothing can fire, if nothing can move, and if your army, or rather if their army is now your army, there's really no option for Mech at this point, and you can just absolutely smash through this pretty hard. So really, really cool game there. I really enjoyed him defeating that Mech composition. I hope you guys did too, and that'll basically conclude the video. There's more Zerg tutorials down in the description of this video if you want to check that out. Leave some comments if you have any questions or anything to say about this. They're always very much appreciated. I'll be back with more videos very soon, so check that out, and I will see you later.